I think we're good. All right. So we have been going through Genesis, and we've been tracing a story throughout what we've been doing here. Ryan and I have spent time going through different things, paralleling some stories, and we're not going to stop doing that today. We're going to see two stories that are stuck side by side for a reason. And so we're going to get started here. Before we do, I just want to take a pause here and revisit just a couple minutes. So the story last week ended with Genesis 20:17. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his slave girls so they could have children again. For the Lord had closed up every womb in Abimelech's household because of Abraham's wife Sarah. Now, who directed Abimelech to go to Abraham for prayer? You remember? Just before that, God didn't just go to him and say, hey, if you make this right, I'll heal you. He said, have Abraham pray for you, and we talked about that. So if you go back, and we talked about the circumcision a little bit. When Abraham went to Egypt, if you would trace back the roots of the circumcision, it was found previous in Egypt. And who would be a part of that circumcision covenant in Egypt? It was the priests. And so I just wanted to we see God making, and not only was Abraham circumcised, Abraham and who was circumcised? His whole household. Everybody. And so I think God is building on this idea of a nation of priesthood. And I think we're seeing the very beginnings of God trying to, Abraham's like, well, what's this circumcision covenant? I think that he's already seen that. I think that he had a good idea of what God was requiring of him, not only to sacrifice part of his body and to look beyond his creative abilities, because you are actually doing something to a creative organ, not to be too vivid with that analogy, but you are seeing that creativity sacrificed in some way, and so we've seen that Abraham had saw that in the Egyptian priesthood when he was in Egypt, and now God has taken that and he has made it a part of the covenant. And I just wanted to see that. I wanted us to look at that for a few minutes, that Abraham actually prays for Abimelech here at God's direction. And I just think we're starting to see this kingdom of priesthood develop. I just think it's a really neat thing. Yes?
And God says Abraham's also a prophet.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
Prophet and priest.
Prophet, priest, and king. God is developing this in his new people that he has decided to partner with. So let's jump into the birth of Isaac. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, and he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to his son. Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God commanded him. Abraham was 100-year-old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. So we got a couple old people here giving birth, right? And so that there are midrash that say that Sarah was acting miraculously, and we might see some evidence of that she was beautiful and young again in some ways. We see that Abimelech took. Yeah, there may be some evidence of that, but that's midrashic commentary. That's not scripture. But that is some of the things we are visiting. What else do you see here? What kind of things do you see here as we read this first? See anything that sticks out? We've been kind of going through what we call problems that aren't really problems. They're just some things that we think the scripture wants us to see that maybe we kind of gloss over in our New Testament brain.
The biggest thing was that they were old.
They were old.
And that's beyond
Absolutely.
standard today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, too, like it says they're old, but is it the same thing like as today, old? Like if you live for hundreds of years,
Right.
it's not,
And there is truth to that, I think, but we definitely know that they were both thought that they were beyond what this promise was going to give.
I remember back to when she left, when the angels and the Lord was there with him, telling him that this time next year she's going to have a son, and she laughed, and now she's laughing again, but now she's got
Right, there's a joyous laughter, almost a redemptive laughter to what, and that's a really good point. I think we see in some of this, we see the redemption of what this promise kept. Abraham and Sarah with the 3 visitors a year before this, they come through and Sarah's laughing and they say, well, why is Sarah laughing in there? And Sarah says, well, I wasn't laughing. And now we see that she has this redemptive quality here where she's like, well, yeah, I laughed. And now, we see her admittance to that and almost, and then they named the kid Laffy. So, anything else?
The first couple of verses make it plain that God did for Sarah what he promised to her, and God did for Abraham what he promised to him.
Absolutely. So, yeah, we see these promises come together, whereas maybe Sarah thought she was left out of those first promises when Abraham was pleading with God, where is my heir? And now we see here, yeah, absolutely, God has included Sarah in that.
And he let her show her womanhood by saying, yet I have borne him a son in his old age.
Yeah.
She didn't say our
That's
old
right. That's right. I gave that
on Facebook.
Yeah, that's right. I gave that old man a kid. That's a good point.
Johnson, they lived longer back then. Were they able to bear children longer back then?
Well, and like I said, we've seen that they already thought that this was done. And they've been looking, so not only did we know from the beginning that Sarah was what? Barren. That the Bible went out. The Bible went out of its way to tell us that she was barren. Not only that, we've been also told that she's old. And both of them are, and so they have tried to do the lineage through Lot. They've tried to do it through Hagar, and now we are redeemed. We see that God keeps his promise, even though they tried to help God. We'll put that in air quotes, to help God redeem this promise. God has come through, as he always does. And so that's an excellent thing. Now we're going to step into an uncomfortable story. And to say it's anything but, we're kind of just playing because, well, let's just read it. The child grew and was weaned. And on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." That gets a little. So we just see Sarah redeemed in God's promise. And now we turn around and Sarah, and we know that Hagar actually went back under what? I mean, she was being oppressed, wasn't she? Sarah was oppressing Hagar. We know that for a fact. And we don't see that that has changed. So we see a dynamic here that is not a good situation. And we have to acknowledge that biblical characters are not perfect. As are we not perfect. And we have uncomfortable situations that come up in our household. And we have things that happen in our families and in our close circles that aren't good. And we have to acknowledge that God has to work through and around and with all of these things for His good and His glory. So I just want to acknowledge that. Yes, ma'am.
And Sarah reaping what she sowed there.
Well, and that's what, we have to look into all that. So let's continue reading here just a little bit. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, "Do not be distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring." God continues to keep His promise to Abraham even through this. And I want to revisit that for just a few minutes, because we talked about Lot. God, perhaps Abraham planned through Lot to bring about God's promise. And then Lot ended up not working out. Lot runs away and ends up living in fear. It's really our first story of someone living in fear. And Lot ends up in Sodom, and then in the little town was saved not because of Lot's great faith, but because of Lot's great fear. And then Lot runs to the mountains because he can't even live there. And we see Lot's prodigy through that maybe Abraham's plans. And we see what nations come from that. It was the Amorites and the Moabites. And they were a thorn in the flesh of the Israelites, weren't they? And then here's, Hagar and Ishmael. And Ishmael is a great nation, right? And God was with the boy. And we see that in the story. But what great nation comes from Ishmael? He's the father of the Arab nations. And hasn't that been a thorn in the flesh for the Israelites? And we see that God's trying to work through all of these problems that Abraham is creating. And He's trying to do it to the best of His ability. But it all still leaves baggage. And we got to acknowledge that. We see it in our lives. We see it in Abraham's lives, or in Abraham's life, and in the things that they have created. We see that this snowballs into troubles. And God works through them. And we see God send the boy off. And so let's continue reading. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and the skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and sent them off with the boy. she went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. And when the water skin was gone, she put the boy under the bushes. Then she went off and sat nearby, about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. And God heard the boy crying, and the angel called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What's the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying there as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. I just do want to, I don't know what to make of this, but I think it's kind of, the boy ended up about a bow shot away, and what does he become? An archer. I just think that's kind of neat. I don't know where to go with that. I don't know what the Bible maybe tried to point out about that. Maybe what he was just, I don't. And take with that what you want. But I just do think that's neat. So give me some more problems out of this. What stands out to you with this passage? Anything?
Israel's still fighting today over there.
That's exactly right. Still fighting. But so you've got Hagar, who was living in oppression. And what was God's first promise to Hagar when she said, "Go back"? He said, "He will be a wild donkey of a man, untamable," right? You remember that? And because Hagar, living in her oppression, could live through her son with freedom, untamable freedom, Hagar says, "I'll take that. Absolutely. Give me that." So yes, it's a good catch on that.
Another example of God hearing somebody crying.
Yes, that's a really good one. God hears the cry. And yes, we've got the boy laying under the bush and left for dead. And God hears the cry and sends an angel to listen to that. Anything else? How old is Ishmael here? Huh? He's of age, right? I mean,
I always wondered about that.
Yeah.
She took the boy by the hand and put him under the bush. And I thought, what 14-year-old is going to just calmly lay down?
especially a wild donkey of a boy, Excuse me. That's good. That's good. So he's an older kid, and he's maybe he's so weak at this point from water that she just wants to. Anything else you see?
God was with him. I grew up.
Yes. So we see these things, and we see that Ishmael was, and I do want to point out something else. His name is never mentioned in this chapter, not once. He is either the boy or Hagar's son or that slave boy, or so I think it really is trying to point out that they had been kind of pushed out of this whole thing. It's not, he's not given a name. I think that's very telling of this situation. Let's see here. That's
I
something
guess
else.
we should give Abraham credit for his concern for the boy also.
Abraham was distressed, absolutely, and it took God's comfort. And like I said, we're still not real comfortable with the ending of this story. He's sent out, but to do the best with what, and God even, we'll see this in chapter 22. God says, "Take your son, your only son." Is that true? No, he's got a son. He's got Ishmael. But is he the son of promise? No. So I want you all, we read through that, and I want you all to remember some of these things, because we're going to kind of skip. We're going to skip because I want to get to 22, and I want this story to be fresh in your memory. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said, "Abraham," and he says, "Here I am." Then God says, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and take him to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will tell you about." So let's just talk about this real quick. Because if you are not a Christian and you do not have a faith in God, let's say you were an atheist or an agnostic, and you read this story, does that sound like a God you would want to serve? Can we acknowledge that? Because if you talk to people who are anti-religion, this would be one of the stories that they would bring up to you and say, "What are you talking about?" So we have to go back and we have to look into history. Is this uncommon for this time of history? No. It is very common in this time and place that children are sacrificed to the gods. We have to know that we are not living. This story was not written in 1993 to a bunch of people in Falls Mills, Virginia. We have to understand that. We have to acknowledge that. We have to look beyond that. Because, like I said, we've got these eyes that just gloss over these because we are Christian and because we have faith and because we see the end result and we know what God wants and we see. But we have to look at this and say, would that make you a little uncomfortable if God comes to you? I mean, all of you that have children in here, especially Ron.
I was going to say, I remember when Pam was reading out of a children's Bible this story. Our son Jeremy was like 5 or 6 at the time. And when this command from God was for Abraham to offer Isaac, Jeremy identified with Isaac and said, why is this happening?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You know, and that's something we got to acknowledge. You know, and so we do want to visit that for just a minute, because we know that Abraham. So this is something that Abraham. We know how the story ends in Hebrews. What does Hebrews say? It was by faith that Abraham. He knew God was going to do something great in this, but he still wasn't in a hurry, because he could have made it in one day. How many days did it take him? 3. And the Midrash, now take with this, like I said, this is a grain of salt. This is just how the Jews have looked at things over the years. The Jews say that Abraham walked around the Dead Sea, took the long way around to the mountain. Well, what happened at the Dead Sea? What? No, what was the Dead Sea? What was that? That was Sodom and Gomorrah. Perhaps he's making this walk to remind God of the chutzpah he once had. Because here's Abraham pleading for Sodom and Gomorrah over here on one hand, and then God comes to him a few stories later and says, "Hey, take your son, your only son, take him to the mountain and sacrifice him there." And he doesn't explain to Isaac what's happening, because Isaac in the middle of the story is going to come in here and say, "I got the wood. where's the sacrifice? So he hasn't really explained himself here. And so, if anything, to a young boy, this is going to be traumatic. And Abraham is still taking this upon himself. And he hasn't pled to God on Isaac's behalf. We don't see anything of that. He just does it. Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that we as Christians have to remember is God does not lie. And when he says what's going to happen, it's going to happen. We don't know the future of how it's going to happen. But I think Abraham he believed God, but he didn't like the way it was going, how it was going. And I can really relate to that.
Right. That's exactly right. And we see that.
Yeah.
How many times have we come to something, I don't really like how I'm getting to this end result here, but here I am going through it anyway. Kate, were you going to say something? All right.
And doesn't all this parallel to Jesus' death?
Absolutely.
That you can look back and
Oh yeah.
all that parallels.
Right. But Abraham didn't have those
No.
Christian glasses, those Christ-filled eyes. You know, he's just got, and so if God would have let him do what he was going to do, then Abraham's just serving another God who demands child sacrifice, and for who knows what reason. So,
As Abraham says, God will provide. So I think.
and all depending on where you put the comma in that, because there is that because the Hebrew reads that God will provide himself a sacrifice, my son. And depending on where you put the comma in that, it could be God will provide himself a sacrifice,
That's you.
my son. But we know that through Christ's eyes, God will provide himself a sacrifice, my son. So there's a lot of good stuff here, but I do want to acknowledge the uncomfortableness of this situation. I do want to point that out, because a lot of times we read through this and we're like, well, of course. Yeah, that's fine. Is it?
And
Well,
that
did he
is-
have two sons or one? That's
Well,
my
yeah, but we know that this is the son of promise.
Right.
So we do know that is the son of
We
promise.
put the emphasis on his only son.
Right.
So,
That's parallel to Christ in the future,
Right.
being God's only son. Also, in my notes, with the kids, Abraham's dad, he worshipped the moon. It was just in my Sunday school lesson
Right.
today.
Yeah.
So he knew about false worship.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So verse 3, early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place that God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place on the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy will go over there. We will worship, and who will come back? We will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. Pause. Does that sound familiar? Huh? Well, yes, but don't look forward, look back. We just read this.
The brash with Ishmael.
Absolutely. I want you all to start looking for similarities in the stories. Abraham took the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, for he himself carried the fire and the knife. As for the 2 of them went up, Isaac spoke up to his father Abraham and said, "Father?" He says, "Yes, my son. The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Now, as the Hebrew reads, it talks about this journey, and it's like Abraham's talking, it almost implies Abraham's talking about anything but what they're doing. And Isaac interrupts him here. You know, Abraham's talking about how the baseball season's going and how the weather is, and boy, this drought's something. And all of a sudden, Isaac says, look, something's not right here. And we need to talk about this. So the word here for where he says, yes, my son, is actually the word Hineni. And it is, here I am. What did Hagar do when the time came and she placed the boy under the bush? She left him. When Abraham comes to the place where the situation gets really uncomfortable, and Isaac says, Dad, it kind of seems like this is, I know this story. Like, you've got the wood, and you've got the knife and the fire, and I'm not seeing a sacrifice here. What's about to happen? And it's in this moment that the both of them now know the answer to the story. Isaac is in full, he knows it all at this point. And before they walk together, Abraham says, here I am. And what happens next? They continue on together. I want to point out that not only is Abraham doing an act of great faith, who else is? Isaac. Father and son in faith to God. As Butch has already said, and Rita both were talking about Christ glasses. Whew. I mean, you're looking at the Father and the Son here, not holding back his only Son, and the Son carrying the wood, laying down his life, allowing himself to be bound. Man. Showing love. When they reached the place God had told him about, I missed that. So Abraham said, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound up his son Isaac and laid Isaac on top of the wood. Now, if we see Isaac on top of the wood, where was Ishmael? Under the brush. Then he reached out his hand, took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him, that also happened, Abraham, Abraham, Hineni. Do not lay a hand on the boy, and do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Ishmael cries out, Isaac lays down. Hagar looks up to see the well. Abraham looks up to see the ram. Yes, ma'am.
You know, you can understand Abraham, he believed God, because it doesn't the Bible say that Abraham reasoned that God would bring Isaac back?
That's the Hebrews 11 passage that we all know and love. That's right.
But at the same time, a father having to put his son through that pain.
Yes.
That would make you delay. I
Yeah.
think.
We talk about
Hoping that
you
God
talking
will
about that.
come
We're going to mention that in counseling one day. Yeah. maybe they're going to have to mention that in counseling. Well, you remember that time that you took me and And, anyway.
Yeah.
But we do want to address those kinds of things. Anything else that stands out to you all here, especially between the Hagar and Ishmael story and the Abraham Isaac story here? Because the two, let me visit those real quick. But if you all can think of anything else stick out to you all on that? 21:14 early the next morning, 22:3 early the next morning. 21:14 Abraham set the supplies on Hagar's shoulders. And then 22:6 Abraham sets the supplies on Isaac's shoulders. Hagar puts the boy under the brush. 22:15 Abraham puts the boy on the brush. Hagar looks to see a well. Abraham looks to see a ram. And then 21 through 34, Hagar ends with a covenant. And then 22:15 through 19, Abraham's story ends with a covenant.
Both sons are treated the same.
They were both, and Abraham still gets great nations out of both of them. So God, Abraham is the father of nations, and we see that promise is kept.
I was going to say, Abraham's one of several people in the Bible we would say, oh man, he was really blessed by God, but he was really challenged by God. He was really tested by God.
Ron, will you read 22 verse 1?
Sometime later, God tested Abraham.
Just stop right there.
Yes.
You want to do that? We pray and pray, and I don't take away from our prayer list. We pray and pray for people who are perhaps in a test. We don't want that. It's not something you sign up for. But we talk about wanting to be people of faith and people that are God's people. God is going to test His people.
When we make it through though.
Oh man, isn't it great?
And the strength that you now
Absolutely.
have, the knowledge that you now have, it really turns out it's worth it. It just feel like it every time.
And it's like the mother of the wife of Zebedee, the mother of James and John.
Right.
I'd like my boys to be great in your kingdom. Are you
Jesus
sure they can
said-
suffer like they're supposed to if they
That's
want to
right.
be great?
Jesus challenges are right there, and that's right. And we got to understand that. And this is not the first test that God has put Abraham under. The very first thing God said, "You're going to do this." Abraham leaves his people. There's a famine. Goes to eat. This happens, and it's how we deal with it. So there is also in this a chiasm. Verse 1 of 22, here I am. Verse 11, here I am. Verse 6, Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. Verse 9, he bound his son Isaac and laid him on top of the wood. They went on together, leaving the center of the chiasm, Hineni. Here I am. I'm going to do a communion meditation on that this morning, so I'm not going to get too far into that this morning. But man, God is bringing the character of Abraham when it's time for the rubber to meet the road, when it's time things get really uncomfortable in a conversation between Isaac and Abraham. And I want y'all to know this is the only recorded conversation between Abraham and Isaac. This is it. Here I am. The center of the chiasm. Man, it's beautiful. Something I did skip over, I do want to go back and revisit because I just thought, back in 21 when Sarah says, God has brought me laughter and everyone who hears this will laugh with me. I want to go down here and say, in verse 8, the child groom was weaned, the party, but Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had born to Abraham was mocking. Guess what that word for mocking is in Hebrew? Laughing. Sarah says up here in this verse, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And it just seems really strange to me that in the very next verse here it says that we find laughter again, and Sarah does not take kindly to it. Now, was it a mocking laughter? Well, it seems to see that it was, but that's kind of what it seems as though Sarah is inviting with the name. I don't know. That was just something that I thought was neat. Anything to add to that? We're kind of running out of time here. Any other things that stand out? You all have done an excellent job coming into this morning, and I appreciate your all's input.
We generally connect Abraham with words like faith and believing in God. This passage says, now I know that you fear God.
Yes. And look at the difference between the fear of Abraham and the fear of Lot. Lot just lives afraid. Abraham fears God. A lot of lessons here, you all. A lot of lessons. Thank you all very much.